Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion of Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities with author Andre Perry. I am Kate Kraft with America Walks, and I'm joined today by America Walks board member Greg Meow. Greg is a senior staff attorney for Change Lab Solutions, and I'm sure many of you have used their resources. We're also joined by my colleague, Kelsey Card, who is running our technology. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsors listed on the screen. In particular, thank you to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's Active People Healthy Nation initiative. This effort is designed to get 27 million more Americans active by 2027. We will be providing much more information about this work in the months ahead, so stay tuned. In today's webinar, we will hear from Dr. Perry describing the research presented in his book, Know Your Price. Following his presentation, we look forward to a robust Q&A, so please use the question box, you will see one like this on your screen, to submit your questions and comments. We will get to as many of your questions as we can. So thank you for that. Dr. Perry is a nationally known and respected commentator on race, structural inequality, and education. He is a fellow at the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings Institute and a scholar in residence at American University. He has a long list of accomplishments in areas of research, which you can find on our website. But for today, we're going to focus on analysis he has done on Black majority cities and their valuable assets that are not always counted when investment opportunities are calculated. Andre, it is a great pleasure to welcome you, and we look forward to hearing about your work. Dr. Perry.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to show, I hope all is well. First of all, I want to thank you for having me. It's a tremendous honor to present to you today. I've had a tremendous time examining talking about my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, which I will present the research that serves as the anchor for the book, but I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm going to just go right into the research. As was mentioned, I'm a fellow at the Brookings Institution where I study majority Black cities, places where the share of the Black population is approximately 50% or higher. And you can see that there are more than 1,200 Black majority cities of varying sizes, from small under 2,500 to those that are 2,500 to 50,000 in size, to large ones, the Atlantas, the Birminghams, the New Orleans, and of course Detroit, the largest Black city. And you can see that they are concentrated in the South, but they flow all the way up the Eastern Seaboard to the Midwest. There are a few on the West Coast, but I study Black majority cities, and I look at the assets, the homes, the businesses, the infrastructure, the leadership, the governance structures in Black majority cities. And I'm going to start today's presentation with an examination of my own home. Here is where I grew up in 1320 Hill Avenue, Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. It's a small Black majority municipality surrounded by Pittsburgh on three sides. As the story goes, when I was born, my brother and me, I'm the cute one on the left, by the way. My brother and me, when I was born, there was a deal made between my biological grandmother and the woman in the upper right hand corner, Elsie Mae Boyd. they made a deal in which they determined I would move in with Elsie Mae Boy for a period of time. My mother at the time was poor. She was probably abused. And so she had a difficult time raising me. Elsie Boyd was a person in the community that many, and if you live in Black communities, you know there was always one person that took in kids in the neighborhood that were struggling because of the economic conditions in the region. Mom, as I call her, was that person. So when I was born, I was taken from the hospital, moved in 1320 Hill Avenue. My older brother came along with, but along the way, over the years, she reared about 12 to 15 kids for varying durations. Some stayed a few weeks, some would stay months, some would stay years. My brothers and I stayed until we graduated from high school. So the home means so much more than it is actually priced. Here's a picture of my father. One of the reasons why I had to live with this older woman is my father suffered from drug addiction. He was a heroin addict. He bounced in and out of prison until he died in prison. He was killed in prison, I should say, in Jackson Penitentiary, right outside of Detroit, his hometown. And so, but the home meant so much to me that when I go back and visit and I see that it's essentially worth little to no value, it's owned by the city, someone can pick it up by paying the taxes on it. But it astounded me because it was in a relatively decent neighborhood. When you go up the street, the homes are worth a lot more, and it could just confuse me. And so I just started looking at home prices in Black majority neighborhoods. And you can see from this slide on the x-axis, as the percent of Black people go up in a neighborhood, in a zip code, the home prices go down. So in areas where the Black population is less than 1%, home values are approximately 340,000 compared to about 184,000 for places in where the share of the Black population is greater than 50%. But a lot of people will say that's because of crime, that's because of education. And so we wanted to control for all those things. We wanted to get an apples to apples comparison of homes in Black majority neighborhoods compared to those in white neighborhoods. So what we did, we took the absolute price difference. We controlled for the structural characteristics, meaning the size of the home, the number of rooms, we had a sense of quality per square foot. That's why we use Zillow as well as census data. And then we compared to the social conditions, the neighborhood conditions, things like education, crime, walkability, and all those fancy Zillow metrics you find. And what we found is pretty much astounds. That homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by 23%, and that's about 48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's about 156 billion in lost equity. And you can see this is the case all across the country. Wherever the magenta circles are areas that describe devaluation. You can actually look in your neck of the woods if there's enough Black people in the metropolitan area. We have the data for it. You can look at the devaluation of assets in Black neighborhoods. It's a report on the Brookings site, and you can actually use the interactive map, and you can see how much your area is devalued. I just want to give some examples. You see Lynchburg, Virginia, homes in Black neighborhoods are devalued by 81%. Rochester, New York, 65%, 47% in Jacksonville. Detroit, the largest black city, 37%. And again, there are places in which homes in black neighborhoods are priced higher than white neighborhoods. Nashville, for instance, plus 10%. Wichita Falls, Texas, plus 16. Boston, plus 23%. Now, I don't think Boston is any less racist than Lynchburg, but the home price is different. Let's see. But I want to just put this 156 billion with a B in perspective. It would have paid for more than 4.4 million black-owned businesses based on the average amount blacks used to start up their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average amount of a four-year public education. It would have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan nearly 3,000 times over. It's about approximately 97% of the damage of Hurricane Katrina, and it's double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. The reason why I put this in here is that in my book, Know Your Price, one of the chapters I examine is around Detroit. And I followed where my father lived and died. He lived in areas in which there was significant housing devaluation, significant employment discrimination. And I'm clear that if his community had the resources, remember that the money that it also extracted robs communities also of the monies to fund schools, policing, infrastructure. So if my father lived in an area in which he had the resources to go to better schools, had better infrastructure, had the kind of social services that would have helped his addiction or keep him out of or prevented him from becoming addicted, there is no question he probably would not have been in prison, and he probably would not have been killed in prison. And so this money, this devaluation is robbing people of the opportunities to live their life. And it leads me to this sort of conclusion that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. That we're constantly working in this white supremacist myth that states that the conditions and state of Black communities and neighborhoods are a direct result of the people in them. And we see, just from housing alone, just from housing, billions are lost just because of the perception of Black people. I just want you to see how this perception, people just don't believe in this perception. I'm going to play a small clip of me testifying on the Hill, in which with the appraisal industry. And so just to contextualize, I testified with the appraisal industry on these numbers. And the question is being posed, is there discrimination in the housing market? I'll let you see what folks say.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that Black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now. We're getting some consternation, I see.
So I'm just going to go back to this. There's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. You know, I talk about the devaluation in many different areas, not just housing. Housing, in many ways, it's easy to get the data and show the difference between how we price Black homes and white homes. But what I also do in the book, Know Your Price, is look at the way that Black people and communities are devalued in other areas, in education, in healthcare, in reproductive justice, in politics, in economic development. So there's, in all these important areas, there is a devaluation, a pricing, metaphorically or even sometimes realistically, of a lower value of Black assets that are proximate to Black people. And so what I'm doing with this book and what I'm doing with my effort is to show that there is nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can solve, and we need to correct the policies that constantly punish Black people. The reason why I showed that appraisal hearing, because this is not going to come without a fight. There are people who believe that that they're not doing anything wrong, that these homes are just worth less than their white counterparts, even though we can show that they are not. But there's so many people in society that just believe that these homes and people are worth less. And so I titled the book Know Your Price off of my favorite play in the whole wide world, Two Trains Running by August Wilson, a Pittsburgh native. And in the play, the main character, Memphis, is about to have his property seized through eminent domain by the city of Pittsburgh. The city of Pittsburgh offers Memphis $15,000. Memphis goes back to the city and says, no, I'm not selling my property for $15,000. He, knowing it's worth more, a lot more than $15,000. He said, no, I'm not going to sell. I got my price. I know my price, and I'm paraphrasing. But it's a refrain stated throughout the play. There's another character, Hambone. Hambone paints a fence for a proprietor in exchange for a ham. He paints the fence, but he never gets his ham. And throughout the play, Hambone says, give me my ham, give me my ham. And we don't know if Hambone had mental illness before he painted the fence, but eventually he goes crazy and dies demanding his ham. But there's a happy ending. I know people are like, wow, that's pretty sad. There's a happy ending. The main character, Memphis, gets $35,000 for his property. And the moral of the story should be clear. You have to know you have worth. What my book, Know Your Price, what it tries to do is explain the price we must stand on, even if it means going crazy and dying. That there are communities, Black communities, that have all the infrastructure that should enable it to thrive, but that's being constantly devalued. And so my goal is to show that no, we should be investing in Black communities. We should be thriving in Black communities. We should have activities and investment in Black communities like every other. And so, and that's what I'm working towards, changing policy so we can get the investment that we deserve. So I'm going to leave it there. And hopefully we can get into conversation about my book. We have a few questions I know that I'm going to receive. But again, remember, there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. And let's get to the business of correcting for the policies that devalue Black people and Black property. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Let's see. I know Greg has some questions to get us started. Greg, you want to join us on camera?
And if you could remove, I think, take my presentation off, that would be great. Or should I do stop showing screen?
Yeah, Andre, if you could do that.
Okay.
Great, great. Greg, do you have a question for Andre?
Sure. And Andre, pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you so much for that presentation. I had a great time reading your book, and as I was reading it, it was really clear to me that place and community mean a lot to you. I think in the first chapter or two of the book, you recall a running route that you used to make as part of the cross country team back in high school, and walking it again in Wilkinsburg, and sort of walking that line between Wilkinsburg and Pittsburgh, and noting just sort of all the different changes that had taken place in the years since you've been gone. And I was just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about, what role does walking play in place and community to you? And on a personal level, why does walking matter to you? And why should it matter to Black communities?
Well, what's interesting, I might even, if this is okay, I might put my this slide back up. I want to show you something in terms of walkability. Let's see, show screen. There we go. That many Black communities, I did not show this slide, but Black communities are actually higher, have higher walkability than other communities. So it's an asset in itself. And if you grow up in a Black community, lots of them all across the country, you're more likely to live in a community that's walkable. And so for me, walking in a community was central in my life. We walked everywhere, and in the book, I describe a running route. Wilkinsburg, again, was surrounded by Pittsburgh on 3 sides. So it was very difficult, particularly if you're young. But even today, I still don't know where Pittsburgh begins and Wilkinsburg ends. So we would run down the main drag, walk down the main drag, and not realize I was in Pittsburgh or Wilkinsburg. But in the book, I narrate how today, when I run down that same route, you see a change. Before, when I ran down, there was essentially a Black community in Pittsburgh and Wilkinsburg. The only way I knew I was in Pittsburgh was by smelling the smell of cookies. There was a Nabisco cookie factory right at the Pittsburgh border. And so when I smelled vanilla wafers, I said, oh, you know what? I'm in Pittsburgh. And that was the only way you knew the difference. Now, Google has replaced Nabisco in that same building. And they did a lot of placemaking. It's a great area in terms of, you have restaurants, you have parks, you have a main drag, commercial areas. But now when you go down that same drag, it looks incredibly white. And it is largely because we built the place for the Google worker, not necessarily for people in the community. Placemaking is, you'll hear this term a lot, but placemaking is somewhat of a verbal waffle. You don't have to make places already exist, right? But we seldom make them for people in a community. But for us, the data is clear. Black people mostly live in areas that are walkable. And we should be investing in that walkability. That is an asset, and so when I talk about ways to invest that builds community, this is an asset. We're constantly looking at Black communities as deficit laden. But the reality is there are many positive things in Black community we need to build upon, but we seldom don't, because we don't see the value in Black communities. But it is clear that the person who raised me, we walked everywhere. Because it was a community built for walking. And also in the book, I talk about the relationship between community members and schools, that we all walked to school together. And there was the first day of school, we actually drove to school. That was our one treat, to drive to school. But we never drove to school. We walked as a family to school. That's what we did. And schools were placed in areas because of convenience, so that we can walk to them. And so, and people who, a lot of people know me through education, I say that it is extremely important that we maintain the ability to walk to school, because not only is it important for children, but it's a way to build community. When you walk past your neighbors, when you walk past the businesses, and when you are greeting people, you're building community in the process. And it's healthier. There's a lot of health benefits. There's other things. But I always say, you know, we need walkable places, because that's what makes community. It builds community. But Black communities are built mostly for walking.
Okay. I'm going to follow up on something that you mentioned in the book and that you've just referred to, and you talk about Black-centered placemaking. I think you kind of referred to that just a minute ago, but could you just tell us a bit more about what you mean by that? And to some degree, any how-to or tips on how to do it would be appreciated.
Yeah, you know, over the last few weeks, we've heard, a lot of people heard about Tulsa and Black Wall Street. We've always been, we meaning Black folk, have always built up communities, commercial corridors, neighborhoods, and images that are positive, reflect a positive image of Black communities, represent our culture, the positive aspects of a community. Like I said, many communities want highly walkable places. That's it's conducive for community. Excuse me. Now, and so when I talk about, you know, working around the assets in the community, that includes the physical assets, so the walkability part, but it also means the cultural aspects, making sure that we see manifestations of the people in the community, in the art of the community, in the form of the community, in the activities that take place. And we see this in a lot of communities, the using of Black culture, but oftentimes it's used as a way to attract white people in the city. So it goes without saying, a lot of times you see these wonderful murals of Black culture, but at the same time, you'll see a present effort to push out low-income people. It's almost like they want the art, but they don't want the people to go along with it. And so for me, it's about including the art and the people in our communities, and honoring the artifact, the positive assets that are in Black communities and families. But for growing up, all I heard growing up in Wilkinsburg was how bad it was, and how violent it is, and how, and it had nothing going for it. But then when you look at Wilkinsburg just as a town, it's situated close to bus lines. It's close to more than 3 universities: CMU, Pitt, Carlo, other universities in the area. It's, like I mentioned, it's walkable. It has, it's adjacent to parks, churches. It has everything you want, but all we hear are about the negative aspects of it. So for me, highlighting the assets, the quality of a place is very important in terms of displaying or putting Black people in the proper light that we deserve.
Thank you, Andre. So to follow up on that, I think, in your book and in your presentation, you talk a lot about the devaluation of Black communities and how systemic racism plays into that. I'm curious though, and we're getting some questions in that are related to when people, maybe in this case, white people, are realizing the value of Black communities and the gentrification that can come along with that. What are, in particular, in majority Black communities that might be experiencing an influx of white population and a gentrification curve, what why is that happening in terms of, what are the leadership things within that community that are allowing that to happen, and what are the strategies that those majority Black communities should be utilizing to make sure that they're not, really displacing themselves?
Yeah, and many Black communities have Black municipal leaders, and when I talk to them, I say understand that many municipalities are the largest landowners or real estate holders in cities. And so they can actually create the kind of inclusive zoning practices that we want to see that could encourage increased ownership in homes and businesses. Now, when you own a home, when you own a business, you don't mind more people and greater investment going into community, because your investment will increase in value. Right now, there's just simply not enough Black home or business ownership, property ownership across the board. And so when white folks realize they're actually getting a discount by moving in a Black community, and that's what you all a lot of times see, folks moving in, younger people in particular, will move in a Black neighborhood because they feel more comfortable around Black people. And so they'll get the same home, the same walkability, same access to services, but because it's in a Black neighborhood, the home value is lower. The home price, I should say, is lower, and so they move in. And then ultimately, when white people move in, prices go up, and folks are pushed out. So, my remedy for that is we have to increase the amount of home ownership and business ownership in places. And we also need for folks to own, not necessarily if it means building wealth. In the Midwest and the South, yes, there's in many places there's enough housing stock where people can actually buy homes. But in some places, in like the West Coast or even New York City, it's hard to buy in to a home. So there will always be some type of a rental thing. But we need still to find ways to anchor people into place for long periods of time. So if that means alternatives to home ownership that are cooperative in nature, or some type of land bank situation. But the point is, we need to have people anchored in a particular community long enough so they can get a decent job, so they can send their kids to school, so they don't have to bounce around from neighborhood to neighborhood, which is another wealth robbing sort of activity. And so, yes, but ownership is critical. If we can find ways to increase home ownership, that would be great. And I have to say this, and for all those listeners, this is an opportunity for you to get involved in my research. I'm entering a partnership with the social entrepreneurship organization Ashoka. We are going to have a $1 million challenge grant, where we are going to give away $1 million worth of prize money to people who want to solve for devaluation. And so if you're working on housing issues, if you're working on figuring out ways to end housing discrimination of some sort, follow me at andreperry.edu, at andreperry.edu. Look for that announcement. And we may be, and I would love for you to enter that challenge. But the point is, there are folks working on these solutions all across the country, and we need to incentivize folks who have solutions that are nuanced to the Bay Area, that are nuanced to Detroit, that are nuanced to Kansas City, in ways that uplifts value and ownership and inclusion. And ultimately, if we get that kind of activity going, we can restore value to its proper place.
It's great to hear about the challenge. And we've gotten quite a few questions from the audience, and I want to start with one that fits into what you just said. Someone writes in and they want to know, what's your theory of change for how to value Black assets?
Yeah, for me, the theory of change, when you invest in assets, and this is sort of the premise of the book, when investing in assets that are proximate to Black people, develops community in a way that has positive impact to Black people. Most of our development is predicated on an investment in deficits or investments in fixing Black people. And the problem with that is when you see Black people's problems, the investments always go to essentially to white people to fix Black people. And so my strategy is invest in assets that Black people own, that are proximate to, so that they can benefit from the change. I don't think there's anyone, well, there are some people, a lot of people who simply don't believe in valuing Black lives or don't want to invest in Black lives. But there are a lot who want to see growth in Black communities. That simply just need a vehicle to invest in a way that uplifts Black people. So for me, this is about investing in Black people and their assets, not in inanimate objects like buildings. If you invest in place and not people, that's what gets push out and gentrification. So for me, the theory of change is invest in assets, strengths of Black people, the things that are that we own, that are close to us, that we would see a return to if invested in.
Thank you.
Greg, if you don't mind, I want to do just a follow-up to that, because I think in your book you talk about Inslee, Alabama, and
Yeah.
Brian Rice and what he's done. Maybe you could tell people a little bit about that story, because I think it illustrates what you're just talking about.
Yeah, one of the chapters in the book I call Buy Back the Block. There's a gentleman by the name of Brian Rice, and you can actually get an excerpt of this from City Lab. I offered up an excerpt. If you just Google Brian Rice, Andre Perry, it's actually getting a lot of traction right now. But I followed this man's effort to buy the block. He bought 8 buildings. Using family and friends' money. He talked to his friends and family, collected enough money to buy back the block. And that's what happens in some areas, that the home prices are so low, the building price is so low, you can actually buy large swaths of property for relatively cheap. And that's what he did. So he purchased the property, and then he seeks loans to develop the property. And the appraisals come in so low that he can't get any backing for the property. Now, this is a classic example of what I work on. It's that this gentleman is doing everything right. He wants to invest in this community, and he doesn't want to put up like condos. He's trying to, invest in ways that you can have a grocery store, you can have businesses that serve the community. He also wants to work with high worth occupations, tech companies and this sort. But he can't get a loan because the properties are so devalued or undervalued. And so he is a classic example of somebody who's putting in his own money to invest in ways that benefits the community, but he can't get the backing of an industry that is clearly off on their assessments. His case is now making worldwide news. I was fortunate to be on the front end of this. The BBC has been following this. Again, he's getting national coverage now, talking with Congress about it, just to look at the appraisal process. If you follow him, you'll see that the comps that were used to value his property were, just ridiculous. They were just not comparable, really. And but it's a travesty. But here's a guy that is investing in his community, and he can't get the kind of return. If if he were white. There's no question about it. If this was a white project in a white community, he would have seen investment dollars come his way. But he's just not. So I encourage everyone, one, to get Know Your Price, my book, but then you can also get the excerpt on City Lab. It's a compelling story, but get Know Your Price.
Thank you, Andre. I wanted to also build on a little bit of what you were talking about. And, you know, we've been talking a lot about the need to invest in people and not just places. And I think one of the struggles, you know, for organizations like ours and others within the, you know, active transportation realm and the walking realm is that a lot of the interventions are traditionally and have traditionally been in place and in structure, you know, and infrastructure changes and things of that nature. So I was wondering what your recommendations are to, you know, organizations like ours or advocates who are really interested in improving walking conditions in Black communities. You know, what does it mean to invest in people and walking in Black communities?
Yeah, you know, I don't want to get too wonky, but oftentimes it's the investment in the kinds of developers you know that represent the community. you know, when you're talking about infrastructure improvement, those are the ways that jobs are created. And oftentimes when you look at who's doing the actual improvements, they're not the people that of the community, nowhere near. And so I say, look, that we just need to do a better job in procurement processes when it comes to who gets the contract to pave the roads, to build, help revitalize the park. That you got to see the connection between the people and the place. And so some of it is just making sure that we're investing in actual Black and brown people in community. And not just investing in place. And so there's a happy medium, but too often we say, hey, I want to see that part of the Black community improve, but not necessarily people improve. And you got to make sure you do both.
As I said, we have lots of questions, and one of them has to do with if you have examples of similar research in small towns or rural communities.
Yeah. Well, you know, I say this all the time. Wilkinsburg is actually a small town. I mean, it's a small municipality. So it's about 17,000. That might not be small enough for some, but it does represent the range, the kinds of communities that are going through similar action. You know, I can point to a number of rural areas that have a lot going for it in terms of the physical assets, its proximation to highways, it's the quality of land, the resources in it. And we just don't see where we should be in the investment because we don't see these things as quality assets. And as people start moving back into these smaller municipalities, which is happening, we should be making investments in smaller communities. I mean, we act as if, I mean, and people do say things like this. They say, one day we'll just be, everyone will live in 5 big cities. No, that just won't happen. Eventually people move from small, medium, large size cities, and we should have conditions in all of those places that are conducive for growth. Now, not every place should be Chicago. Not every place should be Atlanta, or not every place should be the Bay. And we should, but every place should have the infrastructure to be, to recognize its strength, to develop the people there, because you never know what a Wilkinsburg can be if you don't give it the basic building blocks for growth and success.
Great. So I think we were talking a little bit about, and I know you said you didn't want to get too wonky, but procurement policy and the role that can play in improving, you know, community conditions and investing in people. And we're getting some questions in from our activists out there who are really wondering what are the other kinds of local policies that they can advocate for at the local level that will address maybe some of the systemic racism that has, created the disinvestment in our communities. What are those?
Yeah.
What can they do and what can they advocate for?
Well, I'll point to a couple that no one really says, I'm at fault for, but we're all at fault for. School zones. When it comes to school zones, no, we essentially gerrymandered districts in a way that privileges some communities and hurts others. And we all know that you can live side by side in districts, and one has about 28,000 per child, and the other has 18,000 per child in terms of allocation. And we know that property taxes are a driver of that difference. But when it comes to school financing reform, people don't want to step up. And I think that's one of those areas that if we said, hey, let's create a more equitable system of distributing resources, that one, when you invest in things you don't necessarily trust, you actually grow trust. Investment should also build trust. And so for me, I talk also a lot about schools, because it's the one thing that we all need. We we all recognize it's vitally important, but there's a lot of hoarding going on in terms of resources when it comes to education. If there's one system I wish I could change, and I really do think one of the reasons why we have so many racial problems in this country is because we refuse to go to school together and learn together, and we refuse to learn about the history and the progress of Black Americans. We ignore slavery, we ignore Jim Crow racism, we ignore redlining. It wasn't until recent, mind you, that redlining became a thing. I mean, and yet we blame Black communities all along. But redlining went hand in hand with how we finance school districts as well. It's an heirloom of a segregated past. And so, yes, I want to see curriculum changes. I want to see financing changes. And I'm not saying that Black people need white people or white people need Black people to learn, because there's clearly places where that kind of integration just numerically can't happen. We all need the resources to learn. But we should not create systems that hoard resources based on a lesser value of one group and a higher appraisal of worth of another. And that's what we have currently. So it's a very hard thing to do, to change school financing systems, but it's something that we should do. But I also think that there are we can encourage at least at the state and national level some type of micro loans to homeowners where there's devaluation, because when you have devaluation, you have less revenue to fix up your home or to invest in the community. So I think if we can, and municipalities know the areas that are devalued, we should figure out ways to distribute microloans to current homeowners. And within that same vector, that we should find ways to create new homeowners from renters. Again, the one advantage, if there's an advantage, that many communities, home prices in Black neighborhoods are low. Unfortunately, banks won't back many of the homes that are priced very low. So if you're in Detroit, for instance, where you have lots of housing that's under 30,000, a bank won't back that kind of mortgage. But if we had mortgage products that enabled low-income folks to buy into, that would be a great solvent for that. And so there are things we can advocate for at the local, state, and national level in terms of devaluation. And I think I'm happy that Joe Biden incorporated my devaluation research in his Lift Every Voice plan. And so there's an opportunity there to really have some federal influence on that. But this is an issue that I've been pitching to both Republicans and Democrats, because I tell people all the time, Wilkinsburg doesn't look any really different than many of the white communities that are abandoned as well. And that we all have an interest in improving the quality of life and appraising the value of homes and property properly. We all have a stake in that. So this should not be a partisan issue. This should not be a partisan issue. So those are some of the things that I'm working on in terms of things that that we all can contribute to advance our communities.
Yeah. A number of people have written in and would like to have a bit more detail about why Detroit is different from Boston. And there's a lot of questions around why Boston, because it's a fairly segregated city, and why the valuations were higher there. Can you enlighten us at all on some of why the differences?
You know, sometimes that's just the data, what it spits out. I mean, but a couple of reporters who looked at my research, they one actually noticed that where there were green circles, where home prices were higher, they are places that have a high concentration of the Black middle class living in an area where there's a significant number of lower white status in terms of income areas, and it creates that dynamic that shows those data. So and in Florida, I will say that the Florida data is a little skewed because of the retirement communities down there. There's a lot of retirement communities that may throw the number off. But for the most part, I would say that it may mean that you have a highly concentrated sort of Black bourgeoisie living in the same area around low income whites. That might be one of the reasons. But by and large, it's still more devaluation than appreciation when it comes to Black neighborhoods.
Right. Okay, I'm going to let Greg ask one more question in just a minute, but we do have two of your books. Thankful to Brookings Institute for sharing those with us, and we want to give those, thank you, to two of our attendees. So we've randomly selected two folks, and Kelsey, you want to tell us who's getting the books?
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. We have Javier Garcia Gutierrez and Wendy Phelps, who are our lucky giveaway winners. So we will be emailing you for your addresses, and you can also feel free to email us first at info@americawalks.org. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you all for being here.
Woo!
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, great.
I wanted to play the role of Oprah and say, you get a book and you get a
book. Well, next time you can do that.
Okay.
Do you have a final question, Greg, before we move off?
Yeah, I do, and I think I really just want to again express my appreciation for you joining us today, and I think it's really been very enlightening. And I know we've talked a lot today about the role that structural racism has played in just the devaluation of Black communities. And it has, we have a history, of the entirety of this country that has contributed to that. And so the question is really, how do we harness the moment that we're in right now to avoid making the similar mistakes? You know, is there anything that gives you hope that we won't be perpetuating systemic racism or continuing to gentrify out Black communities? And if so, you know, what is it?
Well, I have to say, and most people who've been involved in civil rights and civil discourse and these matters for any period of time, this is a new era where folks recognize that structural racism is real. I mean, and more people who don't look like me are getting involved. You know, for generations, people of color in the main have been the main agitators for policy change. But now I see others, and that's encouraging. I see many white men and women joining hands, walking together. And those, you know, I talk a lot about policy, and policy, I'm more policy than anything else. I just want to be clear. But it really does take moving together. You know, when I think about America Walks, I think about a concerted movement together, and that's what we need. So, you know, we should all be walking for justice. We should all walk for neighborhoods that are safe, that are walkable, that are community driven. And so I see a lot of that now. And so I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged. I mean, a lot of these webinars I'm on, I have to say that people are hearing me. You know, before it was like, that's we don't believe that data. We don't data. Anybody can manipulate data, and it's like, well, you know, that's not true. But you know, but now folks are hearing it, and they're sincerely asking, what can we do? And so, from metaphorically and literally, we should be moving together. And so, I think you guys are on the right track. No pun intended, but you know, you know, keep pressing, and thanks for having me on, and let me know how I can help in the future.
Thank you, Andre. And I do want to just mention that it was a lovely book. It's part memoir. I loved hearing, you know, the interesting combination of your personal life and experience in the policies and how they were relevant. It's a nice combination that way. So thank you very much for sharing it with us and presenting today. And thank you to my co-moderator, Greg, for joining us and for all of his thoughtful questions. And thank you to all of you who wrote in with your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to very many of them. We'll see what we can do to try and get you some answers. Also, an additional thank you to our sponsors. They were just up on the screen. But also, if you enjoyed today's discussion, I want to ask that you consider playing a part in keeping more content like this coming your way by making a small donation. Even $5 goes a long way toward extending and improving our work. You'll find a donation link in the chat box and in the follow-up emails when we send around the recording of today's program. So please consider it. We have more coming your way. Please join us on August 12th for our Walking Toward Justice in Indian Country. This is part 2, and this is going to focus on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and especially the role that the built environment could play in addressing this very tragic issue. And later, in early September, we'll have another book discussion, The Right of Way, Race, Class, and the Silent Epidemic of Pedestrian Deaths, with Angie Smith, her new book that's being published later in August. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. Look forward to getting the survey from us. We pay attention to your feedback, So please fill it out and let us know what you think about today's discussion and future ones that you would like to have. On that note, once again, thank you to Andre and Greg. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Okay.